Daniel prays. For many years, Daniel had practiced the habit of praying 3 times a day, at morning, at noon, and at night. No doubt he prayed at other times as he went about his work, but he set aside these 3 times each day to do nothing but to talk to his God. Do you have a time when you talk to God every day? You probably pray before meals, before a test at school, or when you are tempted to do something wrong. But it is important to also have a special time each day when you pray and read God's Word, maybe not 3 times a day like Daniel, but at least once a day. Daniel had a special place in his house where he went 3 times a day to pray. It was a room with windows that opened toward Jerusalem. Many years before, when Israel's King Solomon had dedicated the temple in Jerusalem, he asked God to hear the prayers of his people when they prayed in the temple. King Solomon also asked God to hear his people if they were carried captive to a strange land and prayed toward the temple in Jerusalem. The temple had been God's meeting place with his people, but because of sin and prayerlessness, the temple had been destroyed and the land of Israel was now desolate. Yet Daniel, for several years, had been praying at his window facing toward Jerusalem, asking God to return his people to their land of Israel again. Jeremiah the prophet had said many years before, "The whole land shall be a desolation and an astonishment, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years." That's from Jeremiah chapter 25, verse 11. Daniel knew from this and other prophecies that God's people would be allowed to return to their homeland of Israel after the 70 years of captivity in Babylon. He knew that the 70 years were almost ended, and it was nearly time for the people of God to return to their land and rebuild their city of Jerusalem and their temple. Knowing all of this, Daniel had much to pray about. Had God's people really learned their lesson during their stay in Babylon? Were they through with their idol worshipping at last? Daniel prayed for his Jewish people that they would truly be sorry for their sins. He confessed their sins and his own sins to God. He asked for forgiveness. He prayed that his people might be restored to their land of Israel. When Daniel heard about the new law that King Darius had signed, he did not stop praying, for praying was his very life. He could not stop. 3 times a day he continued to pray to God with his windows open toward Jerusalem. He did not go into a dark closet to pray or cover the window so no one could see him praying. No, Daniel prayed at his open window just as he had always prayed. He knew that if he stopped praying to God for 30 days or even pretended that he had stopped praying to God, the people in this heathen land would think that Daniel's God was not important to him, and he would be a poor testimony for God. So Daniel decided he would keep praying just as before, even though he knew the consequence could be a horrible death in a den of lions. No matter the cost, Daniel would be true to his God. As Daniel prayed, his enemies were lurking nearby, just waiting to hear him pray, and sure enough, they saw and heard him praying to his God. Satisfied that they had succeeded in their plan to get rid of the aged prophet, they immediately rushed to the king. Daniel's enemies accuse him. The enemies of Daniel could hardly wait to accuse him to their king. They were very excited as they gathered before King Darius. The spokesman said, "Oh, King, did you not sign a law that everyone who prayed to any man or to any god other than you for 30 days would be thrown into the den of lions?" The king answered, "Yes, indeed I did, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be changed." "Well," went on the spokesman, "we think you ought to know that Daniel, the captive from Judah, does not obey your law, O king. He is continuing to pray to his God 3 times every day. We have seen him and heard him, and it pains us greatly to have to tell you this, O king." The other men vigorously nodded their agreement. We are all witnesses of Daniel's defiance of your law, O king, they said. "But the law states that anyone who prays to any god must be thrown into a den of lions. You know, O king, that the law cannot be broken, for it is a law of the Medes and Persians." The king's heart sank. He realized that he had been tricked. How could he throw his most trusted elder statesman to the lions? King Darius admired and loved the aged Daniel. He depended very much on Daniel's wisdom. Oh, why had he let these jealous men trick him into signing such a foolish law? Could he possibly find a loophole in his law so he could save Daniel from death? Darius tried his best to find a way to deliver Daniel from the lion's den. But the enemies of Daniel kept reminding King Darius that no law of the Medes and Persians signed by the king could ever be changed, and if he ever changed a law, he would lose the respect of all the people of his kingdom. There was no other way but to put Daniel into the den of lions. And so, with great sorrow, King Darius gave the command.